One of the coolest moments I ever had in my life was walking through the big wooden doors into the Harvard Divinity School library archives. A college junior at the time, well before I would start my studies there, this moment was beyond one of the richest moments of my academic career. As the official archive and repository for the Unitarian Universalist Association, there are shelves and shelves full of old records, memos, papers, and even microfilms from congregations, ministers, thinkers, and others from within our tradition. And I remember pulling these old gray folding boxes off of the shelves, and inside would be all sorts of different papers and materials. Combing through these boxes, as you never quite knew what you might find in each of them, you would at times find a rare gem or two. For example, in one box, I found some old World War II gasoline rations from a minister who had served as a chaplain in the army, a Unitarian. And from another box, I got to hold these old yellowed letters and correspondences from Unitarians and Universalists during the Civil War. These carefully crafted and scripted letters with ink fading with time. I thought that this was the wildest thing, that I, of all people, was allowed to hold these with my own two bare hands. And interestingly, hands holding documents through gloves would sometimes actually cause tears if one wasn't careful. Though you can bet I did wash my hands first before handling these things. Through this experience of spending an entire summer of research in the archives, I learned a lot about the value of our tradition's rich history. And I encountered familiar names and places that we know well in our UU movement today. I had full access for many of these foundational early documents from the time of the UUA's consolidation in 1961. And I found myself literally holding history. And being in such a place like this taught me so much beyond words, the meaning and power in calling ourselves Unitarian Universalists. About what it means to link ourselves in this unbroken line with these rich stories of our not so distant past. When I would finally start as a student at Harvard, I was already well acquainted with the library and these special collections. In fact, for my Unitarian Universalist history course, I was able to conduct a congregational history project for the First Parish in Wayland in Massachusetts, the congregation where I only recently served as intern minister before coming to you all. With a dedicated and well-maintained congregational archive, everything for this project felt possible. I traced the history of a historic controversy in the parish involving a Wayland school teacher and member of our church who was accused of being a communist spy during the time of the Red Scare and Senator Joseph McCarthy. Because of this collection, I was able to add to the conversation to uncover the names of a couple of other members who had been accused also of being communists, as well as to share in this largely forgotten history with the congregation by sharing it in a sermon for a Sunday service. This project was only possible because we had a collection of these rich stories, even some of these stories that have been more lost to memory and history. Now, I know that the First Parish in Wayland has had quite the head start in terms of years of history, but UUCGT itself also has a rich history. With its over 50 years as a congregation and fellowship, yes, even as a modest group of children and adults in a college science building, to its current size and location to where we are today. Richard's reflection this morning shares some of the richness found in these early moments. Starting in a small auditorium at NMC, the trappings of what would be a, quote, regular church were instead a lab table serving as both a lectern and pulpit, and a periodic table of the elements as a liturgical backdrop. In Richard's own words, this may not immediately strike one as a setting for religious services, but it's not really so out of place for a smallish group comprised of religious liberals and humanists, finding community and fresh air relief from dated religious ritual and tired traditional dogma. Now, what I love in this reflection is how we can see how this story actually unfolds. From a time of all lay-led services and no settled minister, from a time of approaching religiosity with suspicion and singing hymns only sparingly, we see how UUCGT has embraced its own story within our wider UU movement. UUCGT has affirmed its role as a leader in Unitarian Universalism for Traverse City, for Grand Traverse County, and for all of Northwest Michigan. And today, we understand ourselves as a congregation within a particular religious tradition as Unitarian Universalists, though we also still carry the value in understanding what it is we believe and why. We understand that it's important for us to know why we do what we do and what beloved rituals are still important to us from this rich, bountiful past. Richard's reflection is a small, bountiful sample of these stories that continue to inform our daily living. So many of these stories are still yet unwritten, and indeed, some of you from the congregation's earlier days might remember some of these moments and even faces well. Remembering those who had a role in shaping our community to where we are today. And sadly, some of these stories are in fact lost, whether by people losing contact with our community or passing away. As important and rich as these stories are, there is a real need and urgency for us to collect them while they are still within our very midst, while the storytellers and keepers of these memories are still with us today. The fascinating thing about these histories is how they shape us without us always knowing. For example, before I was much of a student of the history, even before I even thought about ministry or divinity school, I didn't always fully understand the order of UU services and why it is that we keep some of these certain components. And even for many newcomers who come and experience our services, our services might appear fairly Protestant at first glance, with a sermon preached by a minister and a set of congregational hymns that we sing together. This rhythm is one that is actually deeply informed by our history without us always knowing exactly why. Even something like our congregation's governance style is something with historic roots that we might not always know. For example, how many of you knew that our polity, a fancy word for our congregation's form of governance, comes from the Puritans, traced to an old foundational document called the Cambridge Platform of 1648. And how many of you knew that this document is actually what we in Unitarian Universalist Association, as well as other congregationalist movements and churches, still reference and draw from for how we do our business and how we conduct our nature of governance? You see, when we have ready access to this history, we can finally start to understand our why. This is what I found so compelling about studying at the birthplace of American Unitarianism and Universalism in the early colonies. Holding this history in my fingers made it all the more real. I could trace it in a way that I saw myself in the larger story. And this is the great gift that comes from knowing and sharing our history. How each one of us, whether we are old or new, whether this is our first time at a Sunday service or our 100th time, each of us can start to see ourselves in the larger story when we can hold this history in our midst. Dear ones, this is an exciting moment for us as a congregation. We are ready to launch a project geared at helping us to hold and capture some of these stories and memories while they are still within our midst. We've called this the Holding History Project, and myself and a whole team of others are hoping that you might have a piece of your own story with UUCGT that you might share. As your new minister, what is it that I need to know about our congregation's history? What stories or voices, people or events should I know in this rich tapestry of who it is that we are? Our congregation is in an interesting place in our movement's history. While so much has already been written with the development of Unitarian Universalism in New England, there are still stories to be written about our Unitarian Universalist story here in the Midwest. In fact, this is where you come in. We have a rare opportunity to write this history together as we move forward toward this bright future together. At the end of this project, we're hoping to compile photos, stories, and reflections of these memories into an actual book, something that we can physically hold, that holds some of these pieces of our precious shared history. This book will be a gift for the future for the legacies of those members and friends who have come before. And in fact, this book may even be a gem for a future student of UU history, a special and important piece they stumble upon in the archives as they research and uncover the path that we've taken to this present moment. No matter who you are or where life's journey intersects with our community, we would love for you to share some of these moments and memories with us. We've set things up for this to happen in several different ways, and all of this information can also be found within this morning's Sunday reminder flash. First, you can email them to our team with your photos and writings and reflections in our special archives email address, archives@uucgt@gmail.com. You can also come by UUCGT and drop off your photos and historic pieces for this collection in a bin that's labeled Holding History Project that's found right within the entryway when you walk in. And lastly, you can also mail in your pieces, your photos and letters to the office at 6726 Center Road. Just be sure to include Holding History Project at the attention. Following our service today, we will actually go straight into a time of storytelling and sharing these memories in place of our usual breakout rooms. And following this time, we will continue to hold opportunities here at UUCGT for folks to gather and share some of these stories so that we can add them to our collection for this book. We cannot write up and capture this rich history without your help. And each one of you holds a piece of this history that we have to share. As the Reverend Scott Taylor reminds us in our reading, as we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes more clear. As we attune ourselves to the many shoulders on which we stand, purpose, not want and winning, asserts itself as the logic of our lives. As we remember what they survived and how they sacrificed for the faceless us who would come after, we find a courage far beyond what we could muster up on our own. Beneath this seemingly dry dirt and seemingly lonely roads, there are wells from which we can drink. So, dear ones, I invite you to drink deep of these rich wells of history. And as we turn back to see how far we've come, may we be inspired with the bright road of our future ahead of us. May we together help to write this story as a gift and legacy for the generations of future students and folks within our community who intersect with our congregation's history. And may we be emboldened by this tapestry, this weaving of our lives and stories, to know more of who we are now more than ever. May it be so. And amen.